That means you've now claimed that document front and back, bottom right. Yeah.
Front and back of every page, or just the back of the last page of a document of, say, 5 or 6 pages?
Okay, if you have two of 7 pages, 3 of 7 pages, 4 of 7 pages, then you can do what you're saying.
Just the last.
Okay, just go and put it on the last. If you want to put it on every page, that's fine too. Okay, that way they can't squeeze something in there. But I don't know, that they would even try to do that. But because we're making up this document when we're taking the back.
Joe, it's not your signature, it's your autograph. Define the difference between signature and autograph, please.
Yeah, the signature is simply begins with the word sign, and sign is simply that. It's an indicator. It's a fiction. The autograph is auto, comes from the self. It's the self signing. And so these words mean things, and I'm going to break and let David continue, and I'll come back on if you're not bored with it and teach you about the power of words and how these things are either constructed positively with the use of words or they're destroyed by the use of words. The scripture says, by your words are you justified, by your words are you condemned. How true.
We're ensnared by the words of our mouth.
And so we have to be very careful about words. They use words of art on paper. And so when they give you a form to sign, they're making a legal determination for you. Use our form. And so you've taken their instruction as, basically, you set them up as your power of attorney to instruct you as to how you're to fill out that form. And you've understood or you understand their instructions in that form. Anytime anybody hands you a form, they're making a legal determination for you. This is why Scott wanted to go ahead and use his own. You want to go ahead and write it up your way. You're making your own legal determinations about what you're about to sign. Down at the bottom here, even under these new IACAs, we put this underneath the IACA, and because this is going to reproduce when you fax it in black, if you write down here, signed in or autographed in, however you want to do it, red ink.
The new national form, let's just say this particular form, the new national form will say IACA, we're in the place of the Office of the Secretary of State of Texas web form. If you notice, there's a little bit of space down here, and that's where we put it. Okay? And then if we turn it over on the back, we also do it in the back.
And when you fax this thing in, and I recommend faxing because there is no way that this Uniform Commercial Code is going to take the mixed case lettering. It'll come in all capital letters throughout the whole thing so that they've got control over it as a fiction. But you can put in there DBA, we've done it. You can take the DBAs and you can make the entity's name or the debtor. For instance, Joe Blow, DBA, D/B/A/ as, all capital letters, Joe Blow, agent, City of Dallas, Incorporated, Inc. When you send it in, turn it upside down through the fax machine. There's a lot of blank area down here. That portion usually disappears. And this will come out on their fax. And when we get them back, and they've accepted them. They accept them exactly as we've sent them in with the control of the document at the bottom. So now you've got primary control of the UCC because you made the filing. This has also become the bailment. You've given them your name, haven't you? They owe you some money, so you can make the IACA your debtor, which we've done. We just go ahead and put them on there as a debtor and put yourself in as creditor also. So anytime you give up that signature, you're giving up your credit. You're giving up something very valuable. Think of your signature always as a big pot of gold. The officer wants the signature. Here, give me your signature. Give me your receipt for $1 million. Where does it say that? Well, if you look in your county records, you'll find my offer of contract. My offer of contract is, if you take my signature, I take your $1 million. That's fair.
Sign for it.
Sign for it.
Here, sign for.
So we've got quite a few people. He's
asking you to sign. You ask him to sign.
Carrying receipt books with them.
It's all business. This is not about.
It's all commerce.
It's all about commerce, and we're staying in honor when we say thank you for doing business with me. Thank you for pulling me over and accepting my offer of contract. I talked about this a little bit in the first video. Thank you. And here's your invoice. May I have my receipt, please? So he's giving you an invoice, and you say, oh, thank you for using my property. Here's your invoice. So if he gives you an invoice for, it's called a citation, it means the same thing, it means debt, and we have unalienable rights, we're debt-free. So he gives you, let's say that's a $200 ticket. You thank him. Now you attach your $1 million invoice for him. And you tell him, here you go, or you can mail it in afterwards. You have 3 days to do this, 72 hours. And you just accept it for value and put a sticky pad on top saying, please adjust my account. Here's your $1 million for using it. So now who's the bigger debtor? And he's going to take that and adjust the account, not from the $1 million silver that you're giving him invoice, but his corporation will take that to the federal window at the Department of the Treasury, and they'll actually get paid $200 because they have your energy, they have your exemption, your autograph. Okay, that's all they're looking for, and then they can monetize that in fractional banking 10 times, and they do a whole bunch of other things. So, but what they can't do anything with is when you give them an invoice for $1 million silver for a violation, or you count how many times that name is used. And so what happened to me with Fort Worth, as I mentioned, was I did this with the police officer, and then I get a presentment from the court clerk. And then Rice tells me, this is 3 years ago or so, and Rice tells me, oh, go ahead and thank her and send her the invoice. I said, can I do anybody else? Notice to the principal is notice to the agent. Notice to the agent is notice to the principal. Go to the top. So to the mayor, to the city manager, and so they all got invoices. And they never heard anything more about it. So they're forever my debtor because it's 24-to-1 ratio from Federal Reserve notes to silver. So you can figure that how much, it's about $7 million is what it came out to.
These are very interesting as far as these contracts go. And as Davis said, I've got several invoices out in Abilene.
Much bigger.
Considerably bigger. And
the mayor resigned with him.
And the city manager. How interesting it happens, because once this is accepted, then you have a contract. And what you've got is, you've got one corporation merging with another corporation, don't you? And that's a meeting of the minds, and that's a contract. There's no duress. Buyer doesn't have to buy, meeting a seller that doesn't have to sell, coming together and agreeing on a price, which is the definition of fair market value of anything you're buying. You've established the fair market value.
Who's the creditor? Who's the debtor?
Now, suppose somebody comes up and says, here's a $4,000 tax bill on your $100,000 house. Where's the contract? Did I have a meeting of the minds? Where is your appraiser's license? Who said that property is worth $100,000? The state says that fair market value is a buyer that doesn't have to buy, meeting a seller that doesn't have to sell, and coming to an agreement of a price. Let's say the real estate market's a little slow, and they come in and say, your property is worth $100,000. You say, thank you very much, I accept your contract. And close your check. The city just bought your house. Or that particular agent just bought your house.
And then attach your invoice for them using your property. Which is
how interesting, how inconsistent they are when they send you a tax appraisal. What's an appraisal? An appraisal is an opinion.
Everybody's got it.
Everybody's got one. And on the back of all of these, the MAI is like the PhD of appraisers. That's called a member of the Appraisal Institute. The MAIs are the most expensive appraisals you get. These guys are super good. But on the back, there's their disclaimer. This is only an opinion based upon. They have 3 different approaches that they take. And one is a market approach. What are other things selling for? They have a replacement approach. What's it going to cost if this thing burns down? And what do we got to pay to replace this thing? Basically, it's a cost approach. There's a third one, slips my mind momentarily, but basically all of these are different. And he kind of averages them out, and he gives his opinion. They use it, they call it highest and best use. Highest and best. So the point I'm making here is none of these are the same. What's he going to weight? Is he going to weight it toward the market approach? Depending on what you want to do with it. Do you want to replace the building? Do you want it for insurance? Or do you want to sell it? Do you want it for insurance appraisal here? If it burns down, what's it going to cost me to replace this thing? And basically the highest and best use. Or I'm going to build something on this thing. Well, what can I build that's going to make the price of this reach its ultimate peak? So he'll average these things out depending on what you want to use them for. The banks typically use them. That's what the bank wants. Actually, when an appraiser gives an appraisal, he's really working for the bank. The bank wants to make sure that the money that they're lending is justified. Otherwise, they get into really big problems. Bankers go to jail all the time for lending money and then taking a little extra under the table. The MAI or the appraiser will jack that thing up a little bit. It's an interesting story that an MAI had told, and I think it's worth repeating. We got a guy down in Abilene. Everybody kind of knows him. He had as much print news on him as John Kennedy did from 60 to 63. A guy by the name of Billy Saul Estes. And Billy had an interesting thing he used to do. He would finance fertilizer tanks that he had spread out over property. And so you take the banker out and you say, well, I want to borrow $10 million. And so, well, what do you got for collateral? So, well, I got these fertilizer tanks. So he'd drive them from fertilizer tank to fertilizer tank. And he would impress the banker that those fertilizer tanks were there, and the banker would go ahead and underwrite that. Well, actually, there was one fertilizer tank. And he would get a little guy over here hiding in the bushes. And he would have a sign, and Billy would drive the banker up to the tank, and the guy would note it on his inventory book. And they would go out humping and bumping in their little pickup truck, and he'd drive them back in from the other direction. And they'd go to the next fertilizer tank, which was the same one. This guy would run out and change the sign, and he kept doing that. Anyway, he got caught. And what was he doing? He was financing an equity that didn't exist. Okay, what is the equity? Equity is, this is market value of the property, and this thing down here is the lien portion of it, or mortgaged. Down here. The increase in market value here is known as an equity. You buy for $100,000. Excuse me. You buy for $100,000, and this thing goes to $150,000. When you sell, you get the difference. You get the $50,000. That's the market value. So this is the equity. This is basically what Billy was financing here. This is the portion, and I'll finish this up because this is going to be very valuable understanding what's known as title. And then we'll give it back to David and go on with this. This portion down here is the portion that you don't own. Typically it's the bank or somebody who finances for you. The market value here is this value that's gone up by market pressures. The question was, everybody kind of laughed when they heard about financing this equity that didn't exist, obviously. He put the question out to the Board of Realtors, and that was, how many of you have financed an equity that didn't exist on your real estate property? Now, how does that happen? They will get an appraiser who is somewhat unscrupulous, and this is why the MAIs don't like these competitive appraisers, because you can find one, and if you shop enough of them, they'll come up with an opinion that will allow you to take that $100,000, and he might say, I think that property's worth $125,000. Now what can you do? You can finance another $25,000 pocket money there out of the bank, which gives you a lot of playroom here if you're running a commercial property. So there wasn't a sound in the room when he said that, because typically that's what will happen. Real estate agents will go out and shop appraisers to get a better deal, to get more money for their client, to get the listing. The insurance companies, of course, get more premium money for it. The bankers are going to make more money because they're making more interest with it. And inflation works on behalf of the system in that situation. It works on behalf of the fiction. In truth, inflation is terrible because it puts claims on property that don't exist. It literally is air. You're financing air. You're financing the property, and then somebody up there says, well, the air above that property is worth about another $25,000. Literally inflates the contract. So what we're doing here then is we're working with titling, and this is the next thing you need to understand. The title or ownership to a property. And everybody wonders why they don't own their car, why they don't own their property. The state says all property resides in the state for the good of the state since 1933. They've seized all your property. When you ran out of gold and silver, what else is going to back the money of the United States? What else is going to back that currency? Those IOUs. Everything on deposit in the banks that you've placed in there. So most of that is real estate. The two biggest investments people make are their cars and their houses. So that's what goes in here. Well, here's what happens. There are 4 of these issues under title that are time, use, possession, and this is what you've got. This is like the king owns the car, but he's allowing you the time and the use and the possession of the car. He'll let you play with it. But on the international market, when he's got to go out and sign a treaty, a commercial treaty, he's got to have over here primary interest. That's the thing that makes the money. This is where the power is. This is where the title vests. So the title down at the state, this is when they send down to Austin. This is your manufacturer certificate of origin on the car, the MCO. That goes down there. And this gives them primary interest in the vehicle. They give you a certificate of title up here, which is, anytime you see that word certificate, it's a debt instrument. Debt instrument. You owe money on this. So they can tax this. They don't tax this. This is true ownership. This portion indicates the person who, or the individual or power that actually owns this thing. So title has to do with these 4 issues here. These are yours. That's the big one. When you set up that security interest, this is what you're dealing with. You've given all of your interest, the interest of your debtor, over to your real person. The interest of the debtor.
Joe, excuse me, when you said MCO, did you mean MSO?
Yeah, they call it statement or certificate of origin, yeah.
Well, certificate, since you said it being
Yeah.
it's a debt instrument.
Yeah, I think the state calls them MCOs. Yeah, because they're a debt
I think the
instrument.
manufacturer calls them manufacturer statement of origin.
SOs. Yeah,
So,
either one.
but the
So-
changes to MCO maybe.
What happens here then is that you are going to take this little deal here, whatever the property is that you have that you're giving over, including your signatures and your photographs and your fingerprints, and everything basically that you own. You're going to take this.
Joe, we have 7 minutes.
Okay, 7 minutes with it? Okay. We're going to take this, and we're going to take it from here on the debtor side, which is on your security agreement, and we're going to put it over to the creditor, which is you.
That's the right side.
That's on the right side of all these documents here. This is going to go over here. This is the security agreement. This is the thing that really gives you the power, not the UCC. The UCC only says that this thing exists. And this is the first in time, first in line. You want to be the first one there with the security agreement registered or recorded first in time, because this gives you the control of it. So you're first in time on the security agreement. You've registered it. You've now set it up on the UCC so that the world knows that thing exists. And now they're without excuse if they want to deal with this debtor, because no matter what they bring against the debtor to make a collection from him, that security agreement is going to have a $100 billion debt on it that he owes to the creditor. And think of it as a big bucket, big sack. And until that money fills up that bucket, until that debtor fills that bucket, no other creditor can come in and put a lien on that debtor. If he does, he knows he's going to be second in line until that bucket is filled. So until you get your $100 billion from that debtor, he can't make his first penny. So a quick example, you're taken into court. They're after the straw man debtor. There's a $200 fine. This guy goes over to the court and says, give me the order to the court and pay me. Here's my security agreement. Here's my UCC. You owe me. He owes me first. I've got the first claim on this. I don't know if anybody's tried it yet, but I think it's worth trying, because this is exactly what happens. And you've now got it registered, or recorded, I should say, not registered. You've got it placed over here with your creditor. You're a holder in due course, and you're the creditor of this debtor forever for the $100 billion.
And just a side note, make sure that when you have your security agreement, make sure that there's an indemnification clause in that security agreement. That the straw man, corporate fiction, is indemnifying you, the living soul, from all liens and levies. He's taking all liability. That corporate fiction name, that statutory person, corporate fiction, is taking all liability in the sea of commerce.
He's first in line for execution.
Yes, he's first in line. Okay.
So that indemnity clause, there were security agreements being used in years past. They got in trouble because that indemnity clause didn't exist. So the indemnity clause now is like an insurance policy guaranteeing that that creditor is going to be protected under all circumstances. He's held not liable. So even the statutes of the state of Texas says an individual can't be arrested for the actions of the corporation or legal fiction over here. That's actually written out in the statutes. So
real quick before we run out of tape here, just to get some basics of the document. You've seen here, I've written over here, instead of, whenever you address a letter to someone, you always put your name and everything on the left-hand side. Change. Put it on the right. The right side is the creditor side. What would we have, 1 minute, 2 minutes? Okay.
We've got 2 minutes.
And then we address whoever we're addressing. I don't care if it's the president of the big federal corporation, United States of America. He's the debtor on this side. I don't care if it's the Secretary of the Treasury that claims to be on the creditor side. He's the debtor. Why? We are the creators of this whole creation. We're the living souls. Yes?
And if you ever get a presentment from like the court or something,
that it's on the right?
And they list you in the middle, that means it's undecided.
That's right.
And they're waiting for you to make
the determination. Yeah.
Determine which way to go with it.
Like I said in the first video, which is greater, the creator or the creation? Which is greater? The creator. Okay, we the people, the living souls, the flesh and blood men and women on the earth, have created all these corporations. They're corporate fictions. And all the agents for them are operating in their fictional capacity. So they also, in the system, in this big box, are fictions. Remember the movie The Matrix, okay? So it's all perception. So if we say that they're live, that they're real, because we hear them and see them with our physical body's eyes, we can't be moved by that. They are acting in their fictional capacity. You're the only one in the courtroom that is alive. I went into one courtroom and stood before the king's bench. It's a bank. Courtroom is really the crown's court, okay? And you stand before the bailiff put me in a taped off box on the floor with tape. It was a box and said, stand in the box. I stood in the box. I don't care if I'm standing in the box. The whole thing is a box. But I'm the only living flesh and blood man in there. So anyways, going back to the document creation. So we have we address whoever we address as debtors on this side. If they ever put theirs over here,
30 seconds.
30 seconds. If they ever put theirs over here, then we just had to, write it back and do a correction. What we're going to do is we're going to pick up again. This is the first hour of this second taping, and then we're going to pick up by changing the tapes and then going into. If anybody wants to take a break, this is the time to do it. We've had our break, and we're going to continue with the structure of a document. We'll bring up. I've written this here. How we structure a document is they will always put our name, our fiction name, on this side, the left side, meaning they're trying to say we're the debtor. We always structure our document with the right-hand side, the creditors on the right-hand side, and whenever I give my address, we are not domiciled, we are not domestic, so I put care of non-domestic, the street name. A lot of times it's best to actually spell out even the word street and not have an abbreviation, okay? And the city name, spell it out, and don't put the abbreviated capital letters for the state. That's the federal zone. That means you're a fiction. So we don't use that. We spell the name of the state out completely, upper lowercase, okay? Proper English grammar. And then below, the domestic mail manual, it's not very clear, it's DMM. The domestic mail manual 122.32 says that zip code, we don't have to have a zip code. Yes, go ahead.
Is that not codes, rules, regulations, statutes?
Yes, it is.
Then why use it?
Okay, why use it? Good question. Okay, if we're actually talking with the fiction, we are talking with a fictional system here. All right, the fictional system, really, they're fictions. They don't exist. So we can't pull them over on the common law side. And now there's different perspectives of this. Of course, different people will have their quote-unquote opinions. But when I go to France, if I demand that the French people speak my language and they go, no English? Or, I'm sorry, that's Spanish. No English. If I go to Spain and they say no English, Español. Habla Español? Sorry, I don't speak Spanish. I'm an American. You got to speak my... No. If we're going into a venue in the Sea of Commerce, which is all fictional, we better let them be able to understand what we're saying by using some type of thing. We're not saying here that we are... What we're saying is we are exempt. The word exempt is outside. We're saying we are not part of this zip code system. We are non-domestic. We are exempt. And when we put this here, we're not saying we're underneath this. We're just saying, if you want to put the word your, put the word your. Or something to indicate that it's not yours. But, keep in mind, you're claiming this whole thing. Keep in mind you have, explicitly without prejudice up here, nothing you say can and will be used against you. If you don't reserve all your rights with these words here, without prejudice, what you say can and will be used against you. But when we do this, this is why I put explicitly without prejudice up here. And I've covered that on my first video, our first video. I'm almost correcting myself here. So anyways, but if you don't feel comfortable with using DMM 122.32, don't put it in. If you don't feel comfortable with doing that, that's fine. If you get to the post office and here's the outside of your envelope and they say, we have to have that zip code. Okay, put the zip code in brackets. That's what I do. Why? I don't want to get into dispute, controversy, and conflict with the system. A sovereign stays in honor, always. So what do? Conditional acceptance. Conditional acceptance, we put it in brackets. What does bracket mean? It doesn't exist, basically. It's not legal. Here's the parentheses. Joe mentioned, what is that, Joe? The rounded corners of the parentheses. If this were rounded here, it'd be parentheses. But because it's not rounded, it's square. That means it's a box. It does not exist. But parentheses is really for emphasis. Is that correct? Right? You're making something really stand out when you put it in parentheses. But that's not parentheses. That's a bracket. It means it's not legal. It's not legal. So If you want to have something in there that you're telling them this is not even legal in your system, put it in brackets. It's just it's their language. It's the grammatical rules of their language. We speak English, they speak English, but their English is different than our English in many words, as we covered on the very first one. So, okay, I'm trying to get through this document here, and when we title something, you notice here, I don't know if you can read this, it says declaration in the nature of an affidavit. Why don't we say affidavit alone?
Sovereigns declare.
Sovereigns declare. Why do we put it in the nature of an affidavit? So that the fictions can understand it. All right? So we're putting it in a form of their language, our language, that they can understand. When you have a policy enforcer, a code enforcer, or a police officer, policy enforcer, and he does an affidavit and gets this fictional character called the notary public to stamp it, the court clerk to stamp it, that's a statutory person, corporate fiction, agent, operating in the fictional capacity, making a statement of truth. But it doesn't exist. Affidavit is fiction. So we are making a declaration. A living soul, a sovereign, makes a declaration. So we put declaration in the nature of an affidavit to title whatever we're doing. If it's an affidavit, if it's a notice, we can do, put notice here or whatever, notice in demand or whatever we want to put here. And then what I always suggest for people to do is put without prejudice or explicitly without prejudice. And I've covered that on the first one, the Anderson's commentary on the Uniform Commercial Code, and what this means in the first section. That the writers, the ones who codified the law of merchants, what they were putting in the very first section for themselves to protect themselves. And if you don't understand what's happening in the Sea of Commerce, go back and see the very first one. So this is going to be a 3-volume set, and then there'll be more volumes coming. All right, so we put the address of the debtor over here. Name is a noun, noun is a thing. All right? And I went over, I am not the name. I go by the name. All right? This came from, I'll just review here. It can be capital B or lowercase letter b, it doesn't matter. This came from a senior banker telling one that goes by the name Don that I know of, who's a friend of the one that goes by the name Rice that I know of also. A senior banker 25 years ago told him, Don, never, ever sign anything without bicolon. Now you go in to sign a mortgage document, title papers, that title attorney, he's going to say, no, you will not put that word there. Why? What is that saying? I've seen it with my own eyes. I've witnessed this. A guy that started bragging about what he was doing to the title attorney, and I just shook my head. I couldn't believe he was doing that. And the title attorney said, well, I'm not going to waste my time to fax this because the mortgage company is just going to send it back. If it has bicolon, you're going to have to take that bicolon out, correct it. He had to put his initials on the few times that he did it, on the few pages, and then he went on and signed it as surety for the corporate fiction, saying he was basically one and the same. Two is unrighteousness. So that's why I always say, and I've learned this from Joe, I've learned this from other people, this by here from Don, sharing it from someone he learned it from 25 years ago, and we're sharing this, we're sharing it on. We're just sharing on. That's why I go by me, addressee, I go by you. Depending on who the addressor is. If he's saying you to me, then you is the addressee, because he's addressing you. Okay? So we talk about language and we talk about mastering of the language, and I think something really funny I'll just throw in here is if someone says, what's your name? And whoever the someone is, if it's a fiction or if it's a living soul, you can say, no, what is not my name? What's your name? No, what is not